The lights inside the Meridian Combat Academy burned soft gold, casting long shadows across the polished black walls. It was a space built for spectacle with brushed steel beams, velvet guest chairs, and a logo stitched in silk behind the main mat. A string quartet played near the back, and the floor gleamed like lacquer untouched waiting. Every corner of the room held a whisper of power. High-end suits, designer sneakers, and carefully sculpted haircuts filled the perimeter. Guests laughed in that effortless way only the rich seemed to manage, as if discomfort didn't exist in their world. The mat was the centerpiece, pristine and untouched, surrounded by soft leather benches where invitations, not sweat, dictated who sat. They were influencers, investors, fighters with sponsorship deals, and gym owners with podcast audiences. Everyone looked like they belonged. Except her. She sat alone at the edge of the room, legs crossed, hands folded loosely in her lap. Her GI was stark white plain and unmarked, the kind students wore on their first day. The belt around her waist was the same shade, worn at the edges with no patch or logo to declare her place. Her hair was a muted silver tied back without style or flair. She hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving, and no one had spoken to her beyond a nod or a dismissive glance. At best, she was ignored. At worst, she was assumed to be someone's assistant or the cleaning staff. A man in a slate blue blazer laughed as he pointed toward her from across the room. The woman he was with smirked and turned away, bored. A few feet from them, someone whispered something and nudged a friend, their phone raised discreetly, camera aimed. She didn't react. Her gaze stayed on the mat, steady, calm. Not hopeful, not nervous. Just there. A presence. Like a stone that didn't need to shimmer to be solid. Instructors in black GIs lined up near the front, all embroidered with names and titles. One of them cracked his knuckles and stretched, glancing toward her with a quick shake of the head. The unspoken message passed through the room easily. She didn't belong. But the mat didn't care what names they wore, and neither did she. No one knew it yet, but in a few minutes the room would forget how to laugh. The woman in the white GI was about to move, and when she did, everything they thought they understood about strength, rank, and control would unravel without a single word. Part 1. Introducing the main character, the silent presence. Sub. Part 1. The quiet woman. Elena Ward looked like someone who had forgotten she was in the spotlight. Her white GI was clean but soft with wear. Its edges curled slightly from years of use. The belt around her waist, also white, had no creases or color, but shimmered faintly with age, like fabric that had known more than it ever claimed. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded gently in her lap. Her hair, long and graying, was tied into a loose braid that rested over her shoulder. There was no makeup, no jewelry, no badge of rank or distinction. Just skin touched by time and eyes that didn't dart or scan, only observed. She didn't move often, but when she did, it was with quiet purpose. Not stiff, not anxious. Just deliberate, as if each gesture had already been thought through before it arrived. The people around her wore polish like armor, branded G's watches tucked under sleeves, shoes that whispered money with every step. Even the way they laughed sounded like a performance. She didn't play in that rhythm. She didn't seem to hear it at all. A young man had offered her a drink earlier, more out of confusion than kindness, then moved on before she could answer. Others had looked her over once, then looked away for good. She didn't fit the room's vocabulary, and for that, she became invisible, but not empty. There was something about how she breathed, how her gaze rested rather than darted, that made her absence feel full, like a room with no music but perfect acoustics. She didn't fill space with motion. She waited, and space shifted around her. When the instructors laughed and clapped each other's backs near the mat, she didn't flinch or smile. When someone dropped a towel and looked toward her expectantly, she didn't respond. She wasn't ignoring them. She just wasn't answering the question they thought they were asking. She sat still but not passive. Still like a tree in windless air. Still like something watching back. And while no one seemed to know her name, no one could say she looked lost. Just quiet. Just placed. Elena Ward didn't carry herself like a fighter or a teacher or anyone in search of credit. She carried herself like someone who had nothing left to prove, which made her the only person in the room they should have been watching. Subpart 2. Her mountain past. Elena hadn't always lived in cities or among crowds or beneath electric light. Years ago, she had followed a dirt road past the last post office in a Colorado mountain town and into the tree line where mail didn't reach and silence was the rule. Up there, she found the cabin by accident, though now she wasn't sure it hadn't found her. The place had no signs, no school banner, no eager voices calling out instruction. Just wood worn smooth by time and a narrow porch that creaked under bare feet. Inside, a single mat took up the floor, and the air always smelled faintly of pine and boiled rice. Her teacher was already old when they met. He spoke little sometimes, not for days, and taught nothing directly. Elena learned through watching, breathing with the trees moving with wind instead of resisting it. Morning started before dawn in fog so thick she could barely see the ground. Her breath steamed in the cold, and each step on the mat felt like part of something older than herself. There were no drills, no sparring partners, only movement that circled and folded and vanished. When it rained, she trained under the eaves, bare feet sliding on wet boards. Her GI soaked through quickly, but she kept going, listening to how her own balance adjusted on slick wood. The rhythm mattered more than the result. Sometimes the master would simply walk beside her, hands behind his back, saying nothing. His presence alone taught her when to slow down and when to stop completely. When she failed, he didn't correct her. He just breathed. There were no belts, no photos, no wall of trophies, only breath alignment and time. What she learned could not be framed or measured. It had to be felt. Years passed without her noticing how long she'd been there. She didn't count seasons or look for clocks. She only moved, and when it was time to leave, the decision was quiet, like all the lessons had been. No ceremony, just her teacher standing still at the edge of the mat, nodding once as she bowed for the last time. She never called it a style. She never gave it a name. What she carried now wasn't a legacy. It was breath and silence, motion and stillness, and the ability to listen to a room without needing to speak back. That's why she stood the way she did. That's why no one in the dojo really understood her yet. And that's why she never needed them to. Part 2. A world built on appearance. The Meridian Combat Academy didn't look like a gym. It looked like a designer boutique with a mat in the center. Black marble floors ran along the walls, polished to a mirror finish, and glass display cases held gloves and belts like rare jewelry. The lighting was soft but intentional, every angle designed to flatter the right guest at the right moment. A gold-threaded emblem hovered high above the mat, and behind it a lit panel displayed looping footage of the Academy's star instructors. There were no creaks, no grit, no smell of sweat. Guests sipped from crystal tumblers and carried themselves like they were at a gala. Most wore expensive workout gear they didn't plan to use. Their laughter was low and confident, filled with inside jokes and names worth mentioning. Along one side of the room, men shook hands with practiced familiarity, while women compared training apps they didn't need. The instructors stood in clusters, all wearing black Gs with gold embroidery. Their sleeves bore patches with names, affiliations, accolades. In this world, everything was performance. The way someone tied their belt, the brand of their water bottle, the tattoos visible beneath rolled sleeves. Every gesture spoke the same language: I belong here. I'm worth watching. Elena didn't speak that language. She sat near the corner of the room, silent and still, without a patch or logo to her name. Her GI was plain and soft at the seams, and her belt had no shine, no stiffness, no identity. She wasn't greeted. No one asked her who she was. A few eyes landed on her, then moved away like she was part of the background. Some didn't see her at all. A young assistant passed by and asked if she could clean a spill near the mat. He didn't wait for an answer. Another guest leaned over and joked to a friend that she must be someone's aunt, or maybe just here to take notes. The crowd snickered when an instructor pointed her out as someone they hadn't seen before. Maybe a visitor, maybe an intern, maybe a mistake. Someone pulled out their phone and started recording. They zoomed in slowly, adding a mocking caption about a yoga class crashing the mat, a few emojis, a swipe, a laugh. The instructors didn't stop it. The room didn't question it. Why would they? She wasn't wearing rank. She wasn't warming up. She was sitting too still. No one asked why her hands rested so calmly in her lap. No one noticed how her breath stayed, even how her eyes never chased the noise. In a room obsessed with visibility, she didn't perform. She just waited. If anyone had asked her name, they would have had to listen. But no one did. because in that room names were printed on sleeves, not carried in silence. They saw a blank G and assumed she had nothing to offer. What they didn't know was that she had trained longer than most of them had been alive, that every moment she sat still she was watching, and that when she finally stood she wouldn't need to announce a thing. Part 3. Conflict, mocked and tested in public sub. Part 1. The mockery begins. Brandon Kane stood in the center of the mat with his sleeves rolled just enough to show off a forearm tattoo. His smile was wide and easy, the kind worn by men used to being the strongest voice in any room. He scanned the audience, let the laughter settle, then turned toward the back corner. "You!" He pointed directly at Elena, loud enough to cut across conversations. She didn't flinch. Some people turned confused until they saw who he meant. Phones came up almost instantly. Someone whispered that this was about to get funny. A guest in a blazer chuckled and said she might be the cleaner. A woman near the edge of the mat said she hoped they had a waiver on file. Elena didn't move at first. She looked at him, then down at the floor, then rose without a word. Her movement was slow but not reluctant. Measured. Brandon winked toward the crowd as she stepped forward. One man laughed and raised his glass in a half-toast. Another muttered something about someone finally mopping the floor. She walked barefoot, the cuffs of her GI brushing the mat with each step. Her hands stayed low, calm fingers resting near the seams. Her belt hung loose at her waist. No rank, no knot too tight. Brandon turned toward her with exaggerated flair, cracked his neck, bounced once on his toes. He told the crowd not to worry, that he'd go easy, that this was just for warm-up. They laughed again, not because it was funny, but because they expected it to be. A student near the back zoomed in on her belt with his phone and whispered that it looked like something off a Halloween costume rack. Another added that she probably got the GI online for under $50. They all smiled like people who already knew the punchline. Their certainty filled the room. Elena stood facing him now. No stance, no tension in her arms, just breath. Brandon clapped his hands and told her to get ready. Her eyes stayed on his chest, not his face, not the room, not the phones. Someone called out that she looked like a statue. Someone else called her yoga lady again. No one expected her to last 10 seconds. Brandon stepped forward and motioned like he was inviting a child to play. The crowd responded with soft laughs and murmured bets on how fast she'd fall. Elena said nothing. She didn't gesture, didn't defend, didn't correct them. She simply stood still, not bracing, not resisting, just present. And while Brandon grinned wide enough to fill the room, the silence inside her held a weight none of them could feel yet. But they would. Subpart 2. The demonstration flips. Brandon made the first move with a smirk, stepping in with a lazy grip toward Elena's sleeve. She didn't fight it. She simply turned with the pull, shifting her weight so smoothly that his hand slipped, and he stumbled half a step. The crowd chuckled, but it was light, uncertain. He shrugged and reset, more deliberate this time. He reached for her collar, adding force, anchoring his stance. Elena moved again, not against him but with him. She followed the pressure, letting his balance tip forward just enough to force him to catch himself. Brandon's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't smiling now. He feinted left and swept low for her foot, a basic inside trip. Her heel lifted before he reached it, and she pivoted away like she already knew the step. Phones stayed raised, but the commentary died down. One person asked quietly if she had just dodged that. Someone else answered that it didn't look like dodging. It looked like vanishing. Brandon circled again, this time with more intention. He grabbed her lapel and twisted in for a shoulder lock, bracing to power through. But the contact never held. Elena turned with it, dropped her weight a fraction, and he lost her again. This time his foot caught the mat awkwardly. He swore under his breath as he recovered. The room, once buzzing with laughs, had started to dim in energy. Elena hadn't raised her hands once. Her arms stayed low, loose at her sides. Her eyes never moved from his chest. She looked like she was listening, not defending. Brandon went again now. Serious. Now. Angry. He shot in with both hands and tried to off-balance her from the hips. She pivoted. He reached for a leg. She stepped out of reach, always half a breath ahead. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple. His breathing was heavier. He clenched his jaw and tried again, reaching high to snap her down. His hand passed empty air. She wasn't where he needed her to be. Some in the crowd had stopped filming. Not because it wasn't interesting, but because they didn't understand what they were seeing. One man whispered that she wasn't doing anything. Another whispered back that maybe that was the point. Brandon drove forward with a full-body clinch, committed, reckless. Elena didn't push. She didn't grab. She took one quiet step left. He crashed to the mat chest first. The sound echoed, not loud, just final. She stood in the same spot, unmoved, her breathing steady, her posture soft. Brandon stayed down a second longer than he should have, staring into the mat. No one clapped. No one cheered. Every person in that room had been so sure they knew what they were watching. Now not one of them spoke, and still Elena hadn't said a word. Part 4. The Power of Stillness. Elena felt the shift in Brandon's breath before she felt the grip. It came with heat, not contact. A tension behind the motion. A push instead of presence. She didn't resist. She listened. Each time he moved, she moved too, but never in opposition. Her body rotated, softened, disappeared into angles he hadn't prepared for. She didn't memorize patterns. She followed breath. His, hers, the room's. Her feet slid without rush, without force. Only alignment. She remembered the first time she stepped barefoot onto that old wooden floor in the mountains. Mist had curled around the beams of the porch. The air was damp and sharp with pine. Her teacher had stood across from her, saying nothing, only watching. That silence had unnerved her at first. Instructors before him barked orders, corrected posture, demanded repetition. But this man had folded his hands behind his back and walked slow circles around her for days. She didn't learn forms. She learned pause. She learned how to feel when someone else leaned before they moved. She learned to let tension pass through her instead of holding it. He told her once with a glance more than words that fighting was never about winning. It was about balance. Not balance in motion, but balance in spirit. So, she had trained under clouds. She had moved through rain. Her GI soaked her sleeves, clinging to her skin, her breath the only sound that mattered. Each morning began in stillness. She'd kneel, hands resting on thighs, waiting until the air settled enough to feel. Then she'd rise and move. Not fast, not slow, just present. Now on the mat in Manhattan, she felt the same rhythm return. Brandon was breathing too loud. His weight crashed too hard. His anger poured out faster than his technique. She turned with it. She didn't meet his energy. She let it pass. Not because she feared him, but because he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing what he wanted to defeat. But she wasn't there to fight. She wasn't there to prove. She was there to breathe. The more aggressive he became, the less effort she needed. He reached and missed. He braced and fell. She never tensed, not even once. His body spoke in sharp commands. Hers answered in quiet suggestion. A turn here, a step there. Never pushing, never pulling, just missing. Back in the mountains, her teacher once moved behind her while she practiced placing a single hand on her spine. She was told not to lose that hand, not by squeezing, not by locking, just by staying centered enough that it didn't fall. She practiced that for weeks. It taught her to feel the line between effort and force. It taught her that strength wasn't loud. Now, here in front of strangers who laughed before they watched, she carried that same spine. She didn't raise her hands because she didn't need to. Stillness was a shape. Stillness was a choice. She had learned not to answer aggression with resistance. She had learned that force collapses when it meets space. And she knew that people who need to win don't know how to wait. So she waited. She breathed. She let him show the crowd everything he had. And when that was done, all that remained was her standing in place, untouched, unmoved. The room didn't understand it. Not yet. But silence had begun to press into their ribs. The laughter had faded. The phones had lowered. No one said a word. Her teacher used to say that presence was louder than posture, that the world doesn't need to know your name if it can feel your balance. Brandon hadn't touched her, but he was exhausted. She was still breathing like she had just arrived. The mat under her feet felt no different than the floorboards back home. The same air, the same breath. Elena didn't train to be seen. She trained to remain. And now, while the crowd blinked and Brandon stumbled, her greatest lesson stood still in front of them. Quiet, steady, complete. Part 5. The Twist. True Identity and Bowed Heads. Sub. Part 1. The Fall of Bravado. Brandon came in fast, both arms wide low to the ground, driving for her legs like a freight train without brakes. Elena didn't flinch. She shifted one step to the left. There was no collision, no scramble, no noise except the sound of his chest hitting the mat with full weight. It landed like a dropped drum, hollow and sharp. He stayed down, palms flat against the canvas, eyes wide but unfocused. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was heavy. Elena stood exactly where she had been, her hands at her sides, her eyes steady. No one laughed. No one spoke. Even the phones lowered slowly as if the moment asked for stillness. Brandon pushed himself up on shaky arms, his breath ragged, his face no longer defiant. He glanced sideways toward the crowd but found nothing there. No rescue, no explanation. Master Darius, head of the academy, had been standing near the far wall, arms folded in still judgment. Now he moved forward, each step quiet, deliberate, parting the room without a word. The crowd shifted to make space. No one dared stop him. He crossed the mat and stopped just a few feet from her. Elena didn't move. Her breath was calm, her presence unchanged. Darius looked at her gi, the soft belt, the eyes that hadn't blinked. Something in him cracked, not loudly but like old wood under slow weight. He lowered his head. Not a nod. A full bow. Deep at the waist. Hands at his sides. Shoulders bent. When he rose, his voice carried just enough to reach the back of the room. He said her name. Elena Ward. Then, almost in disbelief, he added what no one expected to hear. Last student of the Soft Path lineage. The words sank like stones into water. Someone near the back gasped. A water glass slipped and hit the floor. Elena didn't confirm or deny. She didn't need to. Her silence filled the space between their questions. Darius looked at her again, eyes wet but unblinking. He said they thought it had been lost, that no one had seen a practitioner in 20 years, that her teacher was gone. She nodded once, not to explain, just to show that yes, she carried that truth. People began to lower their eyes. Not in shame, not yet, but in respect. They had come for a show. They had stumbled into a legacy. Brandon stood at the edge of the mat, still breathing hard, still trying to understand. He looked at her the way someone might look at a cliff they just fell from. Not angry, just stunned. And Elena. She had not said a word. She had not claimed a title. She had not raised her voice or her hands. She simply remained, and the entire room now revolved around that stillness. Subpart 2. The Quiet Truth. For a long moment no one moved. Darius remained, bowed, his breath even but eyes heavy. Then from somewhere near the back a young student slowly dropped to his knees. He stayed there unsure, head lowered, hands resting on his thighs. The stillness around him gave permission. One by one others followed. No one gave the order. No voice called for respect. But something inside the room had shifted, and the shift asked for nothing but stillness in return. Elena didn't speak. She didn't change her posture. Her hands remained at her sides, calm, steady. Across from her, Brandon looked down at the mat, the weight of the last few minutes still hanging from his shoulders. His voice, when it came, was quiet and uneven. Not apology, just a question. Would you teach me? Elena looked at him for the first time. Not judging, not comforting, just seeing him for what he was now, not what he had tried to be. She nodded once. It wasn't permission. It wasn't pride. It was clarity, like someone saying, "This is where you begin." A black belt instructor near the edge took a breath, then knelt beside the others. The silence didn't demand action. It invited it. Darius stood slowly, hands still at his sides. He offered her a position, a title, a place in their lineage. Senior holder, living branch. Elena shook her head gently. No rank, she said. Just time on the mat. The words landed heavier than a belt ever could. They filled the air with something too quiet to name but too strong to ignore. No one clapped. No one filmed. The mat held their knees and the silence held their questions. Brandon dropped to one knee in front of her. His head bowed, not in defeat but in release. His hands rested lightly open. He didn't look up. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She stayed centered, as she always had. There were no symbols to mark the moment. No music, no lights, no declaration. Just one woman standing still while the world around her finally stopped moving. They hadn't bowed to a title. They hadn't bowed to a belt. They had bowed to something they hadn't seen before but couldn't deny. She had never asked for anything, and yet the room had given her everything it had left: humility, presence, and the first breath of something honest. The streets were quiet by the time Elena stepped outside. Her GI was folded neatly under one arm, the belt tucked into the fold like a ribbon forgotten by time. She moved without hurry, her sandals soft against the pavement, her breath steady. City lights shimmered across parked cars and wet concrete. Music drifted from somewhere far off, too faint to follow. She passed closed shops, dark windows, and quiet alleyways that gave her no trouble. At the edge of a faded brick building, she climbed a rusted stairwell. The metal clanked once beneath her foot, then held firm. She reached the top without looking back. The rooftop opened wide under a clear sky. Laundry lines cut across the dark like soft ropes. A bulb above the stairwell flickered, once, then stayed on. She placed her gi on the ground near the wall. Her fingers smoothed the fabric without thinking. She didn't need space. She needed only presence. She stepped forward, her feet light on the concrete. Her body remembered the rhythm before her mind asked for it. The first turn came from her breath. Below, in thousands of homes, her name was being typed into search bars. Clips were clipped again, posted, debated, looped with text and reactions. None of it reached her. She lifted her arms in a slow arc, tracing a path through the air that held no destination. Each motion rose and returned without purpose beyond its shape. She moved like water, finding its way back to stillness. The city hummed below. A siren flared in the distance, then faded. She didn't look. She had been in noise before. Now she chose quiet. The rooftop gave her just enough space to feel free. Wind touched her neck and carried no message. The sky didn't ask who she was. It just let her be. Her hands circled low, then rose with the breath. Her shoulders stayed soft, her weight never landed hard. She wasn't performing. She was remembering. Every movement held her teacher's presence. Not in words, not in form, but in how she didn't force a single step. She let the moment shape itself. Above her, the moon sat wide and quiet. No one clapped. No one filmed. No one tried to explain. She moved with the same grace she had learned when no one was watching. And now, with the whole world beginning to notice, she still didn't need them to. Peace came not from stillness, but from moving without demand, from knowing each breath had its place, from returning to silence without feeling empty. She finished the form slowly, then paused, her feet flat, her palms open. She looked up, not to ask, not to seek, just to acknowledge what had always been there. Then she bowed not to the world, but to the sky, to the moment, to the breath. The knock on her door came just after sunrise. It was quiet, hesitant, like whoever stood outside wasn't sure they belonged. Elena opened it without surprise. The boy from the dojo stood there, shoes untied, hair still damp from sleep. He looked up at her, not nervous but careful. He asked if she would come back. She held his gaze for a moment, then smiled gently. "Only if I can clean the mats first." He blinked, unsure whether she was serious. Then he nodded, almost shy, and turned to go. Elena folded her gi again, not rushing. She tied her bag with the same knot she'd used for years. When she stepped out, the morning was soft and still. The city hadn't yet begun to shout. Light spilled down the alleyways like breath held in waiting. She walked the same way she always did. Quiet, steady, unseen by most. When she stepped into the dojo again, no one spoke. But every head bowed, one by one, not in form, in feeling. Brandon was already there. He didn't try to explain. He didn't ask for anything. He simply placed a broom against the wall just in case. Elena looked at the mat, then at the students lined around it. They didn't wear pride in their eyes. They wore hope. She walked to the edge and took her shoes off. Her feet touched the canvas without sound. She bowed not to them, but to the space itself. They watched her move with the same ease they had seen before, but now it wasn't disbelief they carried. It was readiness. A quiet kind. She didn't teach through command. She showed through presence. She walked the mat and let silence be the first lesson. Outside, the world was still talking about her. Videos looped, voices debated. But in here, the only thing that mattered was breath and space. Elena didn't need to speak to be heard. She didn't need to strike to be seen. Her presence filled more than the room. It settled into the people who had once laughed. What began as mockery had become reverence. Not because she demanded it, but because she never did. In time, others would come. Some curious, some skeptical. but they would feel what words couldn't explain. They would stay. And one day, when someone asked how she changed everything without saying a word, someone would answer softly. She didn't speak. She didn't push. She just stayed, and silence did the rest.